Thank you for joining us for today's lunch break event. My name is Kathy Kalashewski, and I'm the executive editor of innovation here at Bridge, Michigan, your source for nonprofit, nonpartisan news. All summer long, Kelly House has been everywhere the Whitefish story has taken her. She's been out on commercial fishing boats. She's been on the beaches along Lake Michigan with researchers, and she's traveled as far north as Isle Royale to report on this unfolding crisis in the Great Lakes. So today we're very excited to have Kelly lead us in a deeper conversation about what's really happening to whitefish and what, if anything, can be done to save them. So we're recording the conversation today and will be posted on Bridge Michigan's website and on our social media channels later today. While on bridgemichigan.com, on bridgemi.com, you can subscribe to our newsletters, including Kelly's Environment Watch, by clicking on our sign up tab. Events like this one are made possible by the support of Bridge members. If you'd like to join this membership community, we're going to drop a link in the chat for you to do that. A reminder, we're asking you to stay muted during the conversation. And if you have questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat. We'll get to as many of them as possible before the hour is up. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Kelly to get us started.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you so much to our panelists for being here. They all bring, just really a wealth of knowledge. And I think I leaned on each of you for hours to ask you questions as I was starting to report this. So I just want to offer some context for those who haven't yet seen the stories themselves. This is a fish that is really known as one of the survivors in the Great Lakes. Whitefish, people have been fishing them here for as far back as people have existed in this area. They've persisted through overfishing crisis in the past, pollution, the lamprey crisis of the 1950s. And now we're in this moment where a new invader has come and, they very well may disappear from what was once some of their prime habitat in Lakes Michigan and Huron. So I want to start by asking Doug and Amanda, because you both have, direct connections to the fish and the people who fish for these fish, just why that matters. So let me start with Doug. These are such a symbol of Michigan and the Great Lakes for so many people. Can you tell me a little bit about the significance for Michigan's identity and for tribal identities?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Yeah, appreciate it, Kelly. Whitefish, Dictamek, Anishinaabemowin, is a vital fish for us. Has a cultural significance to tribal communities. It's part of some creation stories. So it has this long-term existence or connection with our communities. But also it's it's been important, continues to be important from a food, so subsistence, part of our indigenous diets, remains to be very important as part of that. And then from a commercial aspect as well. So it's a very vital commercial species. It's wholesaled, but it's also in retail, so establishments, restaurants, and the like around here. So it's ingrained, and it's part of our what I feel is our northern community identity, but also part of our tribal community identity as well.
And Amanda, you run the Fishtown Preservation Society, this organization that is really dedicated to preserving and carrying on this deep heritage we have in our state of fishing for whitefish and other fish. Talk to me about the fishing industry that really grew up around whitefish.
Well, the commercial fishing industry goes back, far beyond records. And I know that Doug Craven could speak to the generations ahead of when those who were known to be the state fishermen landed in Fishtown. But the records that are of settlers coming in start in the 1860s, that we know that there were fishermen there, and there's been a continuous fishing operation out of Fishtown in Leland ever since. And that's an unbroken record of people who had the skills and the love of it and the personalities for it, could endure the environment, and were very, very resourceful. So I'm speaking about the fishermen themselves, but around all of that was a culture. And this was happening all over the Great Lakes. There were communities of fishermen. But for Fishtown, I know that you started off talking about whitefish as a survivor. That is one of the things that Fishtown is a survivor of a heritage of commercial fishing, and it is still authentic and here. And one of the things that has been just such an important part, and partly because they are there, has been the whitefish. That has allowed the continuance of a culture here. And I've gotten to know both state licensed and some tribal fishermen from all over the state, and their attachment to fishing itself, but they're also their understanding that whitefish has been a lifeline for them to be able to continue a culture that a lot of people do not understand, even as they may walk Fishtown and see it. But there's a deep traditional culture there that links us in the past and the present through this incredible, wonderful fish.
Yeah, and of course, for those of us who are maybe a few steps more removed from, the fishing itself, who doesn't go to Northern Michigan and enjoy, the whitefish pate or a fried whitefish sandwich or what have you? I want to bring in Ellen Marsden, who is a professor at the University of Vermont and really an expert on these invasive mussels that are causing problems for whitefish. So Ellen, you were the first to discover, and I know you would say you weren't alone, but the quagga mussel that has really become the dominant mussel invader in the lower Great Lakes, and that's really at the heart of this problem. Can you tell me just about that discovery? I know you told me at the time, in many ways it was met with a shrug because we already had invasive zebra mussels in the lakes. So tell me about that discovery, and then also what we've learned since about how these things can wreak havoc in the lakes.
Gotcha. So zebra mussels in scientific jargon are Dreissena polymorpha. And when they invaded very rapidly, and they colonized habitats, particularly rocky habitats in the nearshore area down to about 60 feet, and caused all sorts of havoc, both with infrastructure such as water intake lines, but also sinking buoys, and of course fouling beaches, and people cut their feet. And so it was a disaster. It was terrible, ecologically problematic, because they sieve plankton, and the primary food for zooplankton, and then for small fishes and larval fishes. They sieve that out of the water for their own consumption. A few years after zebra mussels arrived, we were doing a genetic study of zebra mussels and came across a mussel that didn't match. Now, you look at genetics, you instantly see that this is not related to those. And in this case, it was so unrelated that it was a different species. We said, well, wait, we've got a contaminated sample. So we went back and found more and basically said, no, these are actually a different kind of mussel. Closely related, but clearly a different species. And this was in Upper New York State. And so he said, well, we've got another one. There was no name for it. The Russians had recognized it. We gave it a name, quagga mussels, which is a quagga is an extinct relative of the zebra. So it was sort of made sense to us. And as you say, people sort of shrugged and said, well, so we got more zebra mussels. This one's a little bit like them. What the difference is that where zebra mussels stop at about 60 feet, quagga mussels keep going. In fact, they started in deep water and sort of moved shallow. So not only did they occupy all of the areas that zebra mussels didn't, the deep areas, but for reasons that are not entirely understood, they then completely outcompeted zebra mussels into the shallow water. So if you go even in shallow water near the shoreline, you're more likely to find quagga mussels than zebra mussels. So essentially, they're zebra mussels on steroids. They've made the problem much, much worse, much more extensive, much deeper.
And Doug, and I'm realizing I think I neglected to introduce who these folks are. So Doug Craven is Natural Resources Department Director with the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. And you and your staff research whitefish. You do a lot of work around protecting whitefish. What kind of response have you seen from this species, since mussels have begun to proliferate in the way that Ellen just described?
Yeah, it's been pretty catastrophic, I would say. Within the last 20 years, we've seen a precipitous decline in whitefish, Great Lakes whitefish. So about a 90% decline. Really, we started doing some work here about 10 years ago to really try to get a better understanding of what's going on. Many of the models that were out there that we use cooperatively with the state of Michigan and the federal government to determine safe allowable harvest. We're predicting much higher amounts of fish available, but our fishermen really started to see that that wasn't the case. When they're out there actually fishing, they're seeing numbers that were much less than what were being projected through these mathematical models as being available. So we started to, listen to our fishermen, some of that traditional ecological knowledge. They're the people that are out on the water, experiencing things and are living with it on a day-to-day basis. And it's not just a mathematical or scientific for them. So we started doing some nearshore work to see if we could find larval or, fry young of the year fish from Great Lakes whitefish in typical areas adjacent to reefs. So we did some work in Petoskey, near Petoskey State Park, with seining, doing some seines. And yeah, we were pretty shocked to see that, we just weren't pulling those numbers. Areas that had typically been fairly productive just weren't, didn't have those fry, those yearly hatchlings out in the spring there. So yeah, that was very concerning for us. We, really then started sounding the bell, and really got a few other agencies slowly at first, but the state and then a few other tribes now. Many of them are now doing these similar type of seining activities just to try to see if we're getting any natural recruitment in these areas. But yeah, the decline and that direct impact, as Ellen was mentioning, they pull all these nutrients out of the food column. And so they're disrupting that food web, we believe, at that very critical stage when fry are hatching in the spring. There's simply not enough for them to eat near shore. And that's a direct result of these quagga mussels.
And more recently, there's been some research too about the impact of water clarity, sort of as an added threat, correct?
Yeah, so quagga mussels then are definitely pulling all these nutrients out. To the untrained eye, perhaps, come up to northern Michigan and the water looks crystal clear, kind of looks like the Caribbean. It's beautiful out there. But that's really not indicative of a healthy system. You can get a glass of water out of there and it'll look like a distilled glass of water where there really isn't any nutrients in it at all. And so that certainly is causing additional problems where there's more sunlight that's able to penetrate further down into the water. So we're getting, depths of 60, 70 feet where sunlight is being able to go down to those. And that's creating another problem from Cladopra, an algae that can grow on the bottom. And so it's occupying these other areas, which again is impacting spawning reefs. Another problem for Great Lakes whitefish is that these areas now are becoming overgrown with this algae, and also that algae then from storm actions or what have you will wash off and end up near shore. A lot of beachgoers probably have seen these kind of areas where there's a lot of algae that's washed up, especially in shallow areas. It can be very take all the oxygen out of it and really disrupt it from that standpoint as well. That's not a product of overnutrients. That's a very different situation that you see in the Gulf or like Erie and those types of areas where there's these algal blooms because of a overload of nutrients in the system. This is not a result of overabundance of nutrients. It has more to do with the amount of sunlight that's able to penetrate, and then this algae grows in that environment.
And so, Amanda, your nonprofit really emerged in part in response to some of these changes in the ecosystem and then the changes that they were creating for, fisher people. in making commercial fishing more difficult. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And also just about how dwindling numbers of whitefish really challenge this industry, that then is the reason that you can go to pretty much any, Northern Michigan shoreline restaurant and order this fish that's been a part of our diet for generations.
Um, Lots to cover. Well, in Fishtown, when I've, have looked back and in tracing its history, when there's always these pockets of crisis that have happened. And, it was like from the lamprey to changes in the management to, introduction of different species, to the, some fishermen being, pushed aside. There's just always been something along the way that every generation or half generation, something comes along. And when Fishtown Preservation came to be, that was around it was in the year 2000. And that was in response to the consent decree that was created at that time when quotas were cut very dramatically. And so at that time, the Fishtown Preservation, it was an organization that was created by a commercial fisherman named Bill Carlson, to just try to make certain that they didn't lose the ability to fish. He wasn't as worried at that time about Fishtown surviving. He was worried about having fish to catch and what was Fishtown without being able to go out there and continue this industry. And that it just didn't seem to get anywhere for what he had wanted. So he decided maybe it was just time to sell Fishtown and and all of the, so we own the boats Joy and Janisu and the fishing licenses for chub and whitefish. And so those are the only two fish species that we can fish. So when we acquired Fishtown in 2007 with those licenses, I thought, man, it's already down so low. It's already so low, but we were able to actually catch our quota. But of course, 2007, and you think of the changes that really started dramatically within just a couple of years. Basically, the life cycle of our organization has been right alongside with the changing of the whitefish industry. And so in all that time, I attend the commercial fishing annual meetings. I like to go and visit them and where they are and how many of these fishermen are now gone. And just, I have this track record of always the graphs going down and always the food sources changing. And so it's really, you can do a graphic novel about it with all of this and just show the impact of on the people. And so I really prided myself in getting to know who's out there, getting to know their families, and really see the personalities, see how these communities are impacted beyond just Fishtown, but Fishtown in particular. It's a place where people get to pass on their traditions. They get to be a part of a continuance. Their families can come and see the spot where their families were there 7 generations before still doing this work. So that's what's at risk as well. But we've just have decided that our quota now is just over 10,000 pounds. We're going to treat it like it's 65,000 pounds, or just put all the energy into making certain that we can bring in those fish. Now, part of it is regulation, part of it's environment. There's a lot around it. But as long as they are there to catch, we want to go catch them. It'd be great to be able to catch other things as well. The tradition of Fishtown does not say, it's not Whitefish Point. It's not, so name based, but it's just been that ongoing thread. But it does impact the restaurants, everything. I see that all the time. The disappointment when someone goes into the Cove to order a dinner and they can't get that thing they want, or go into Carlson's Fishery and we only provide a small amount of their whitefish. They get their whitefish from all over the Great Lakes to be able to meet that need. And a lot of people do not understand that it does not come from just outside of Fishtown. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And there's a lot of emotional turbulence actually that happens. When people are on vacation, they have expectations. And it's really hard when people can't meet those special touchstones in their family's stories.
And to Ellen, we've all talked about sort of this food scarcity caused by the mussels. It's not just whitefish affected by that, correct? Can you speak to that? I mean, we know and love this fish and we eat it, but what else is affected?
Basically, microscopic plants, algae, are the base of the upper food web. And those plants are eaten by zooplankton, which are the microscopic animals. And then those are the smallest living animals in the water column that are eaten by anything that's too tiny to eat anything bigger. So all larval fishes basically start out eating zooplankton. So whether it's a yellow perch a little later in the spring or it's a walleye even later, that's where they start. So ultimately, this food decrease, this decrease in zooplankton is going to affect a lot more fishes than just lake whitefish. And I'll add also briefly to what Doug said that this increase in sunlight, due to the fact that quagga and zebra mussels filter out algae and zooplankton and sediments, inorganic material that blocks sunlight, affects relatives of whitefish such as Cisco. It directly affects them with the ultraviolet light. And so there are negative effects that have been documented in Lake Superior where the eggs and the hatched larvae can be damaged by too much sunlight. And just to add yet further levels to this, this is also a food web problem within the system. We're worried about the effect on the fishery, but on the fish themselves, lake whitefish eggs, for example, are a major food resource for their relative, the Cisco. So Cisco that are foraging during the winter can make up about a third of their entire annual food by eating lake whitefish eggs. So if lake whitefish populations go down, that then echoes and ripples throughout other species such as Cisco, and they decline because their primary food resource is gone. Nothing goes unlinked in nature, and these are the sort of ramifications we have to worry about within the lakes, let alone the ramifications outside the lakes into human concerns and food and restaurants and infrastructure and economics that you've mentioned, Amanda. Thank you.
So while we've got you talking, Ellen, you mentioned Lake Superior, and I do want to note it's a different beast in some ways. It's not seeing the whitefish collapse that we're really seeing, in Lakes Michigan and Huron. Why? And it doesn't have as many mussels. So why is that?
Lake Superior is quite simply a bigger lake. It's much deeper, it's much higher volume, it's much colder. And so quagga and zebra mussels have not, so to speak, got as good a grip on Lake Superior as they have in the other lakes, which were already more nutrient rich, already much more suitable in terms of temperature and calcium and food for these dreissenias, these quagga and zebra mussels. Then we wonder about what about Lake Ontario, which doesn't seem to have seen as severe effects. This severe decline seems to be restricted to Lakes Huron and Michigan. So there's more to puzzle out than just the difference with Lake Superior.
Thank you. Okay, so all of this begs the question, what can we do about it? Is there any hope for these fish? So Doug, I know that you've been involved in some work that's happening with a bunch of partners to sort of do research that would buy whitefish some time or help them spawn elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on, to try to give these fish a fighting chance despite the state of the lakes right now?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're really hoping to get a lot more partners on. And part of this is elevating it, really getting people, aware of the situation. We really need a lot more partners to be devoting some time and resources to it. When this issue really is fairly similar to the same issue. Amanda mentioned lamprey and lake trout. It was very similar nexus there that when lamprey came into the system, an invasive species, they really devastated the fishery, and lake trout were really one of the primary uh, species that were impacted by that. And once that was made more prominently aware to the public, there was a real strong effort to address that. And there was a bipartisan agreement here, and then between Canada and the United States created a Great Lakes Fish Commission and really tasked them with focusing in on lamprey and what the problem was. And so there was resources dedicated by both our governments to focus in on that. We're lacking that right now at this point. And so there's some work that's being done. Tribes really have occupied the field really on this. Hatcheries appear to be a way that maybe we can buy a little bit of time here by getting the fish a little bit larger and maybe over that initial food web disruption, that hump there. We've done some research with some other tribes, specifically Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa, where we determined that you can rear whitefish and that it looks like we can have them be able to rear them in a pond setting, which is different than lake trout, which are primarily in raceways, very energy intensive, very water consumptive intensive. There's a lot that goes into running those types of hatcheries. But if we can transition maybe some of the federal hatcheries over and have more emphasis on Great Lakes whitefish or create these new hatchery opportunities. It could be done perhaps in a little bit cheaper mechanism by these large ponds and being able to put whitefish into those. So we think that might be a way to buy us a little time. Um, your hatchery systems aren't going to solve the problem. They're really intended to try to buy time. And we found that, with lake trout have fairly recovered for the most part in Lake Huron and are doing better in Lake Michigan. That occupies about 90% of the fishery now. So fishermen are catching 90% of their catch, maybe 95% now is lake trout. And that hatchery system really bought us time until Alewife really were under control. They've been fairly extirpated from lakes Huron, and we're not quite there in Lake Michigan. But yeah, we think that these hatcheries could buy us a little bit of time while we devote sufficient resources on the dracinidid mussels. How do we control those? What are the effective techniques that we can do for that? And there's some movement in that regard as well that tribes are pioneering, but there's a lot more to be done, quite a bit more.
And can you talk a little bit more about the river spawning? Spawning's the wrong word, but these attempts to basically get whitefish out of these waters that are hostile.
Yeah,
How's that
so
going?
we've done some research there too. In terms of Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, we were seeing that some of these bays were holding or being able to produce a lot more whitefish. So Saginaw Bay, Lake here or on Lake Michigan side, Green Bay. And so we did a little bit more investigation, and what we were finding is that there are river run stream or river run strains of Great Lakes whitefish, where they're utilizing the Fox River, they're utilizing these river areas to rear or to lay their eggs, and that they seem to be doing much better. A little bit different nutrient issue there, certainly. There's a lot more flow, those types of things. So we started looking into it more, and that in Michigan, it's not only the near shore, but we did have quite a few areas where there were Great Lakes whitefish that ran or spawned in these river systems, but because of logging, because of dams for low head dams or otherwise, a lot of that connection was disrupted. So we've looked at trying to do some work in that regard. We did some experimental work in the Jordan River system, where we placed whitefish eggs in these blocks, if you will, that are kind of stationed there, and then went back and we did see that there was some successful hatching, and we did see some successful larval fish come out of those. So that could be another opportunity that we're collectively looking at is, can we do that? Again, that won't replace the Great Lakes habitat. There's just way more reefs and lakeshore available than these rivers could possibly counter, but that could be a way again to buy us more time and keep the fishery moving along if we're able to get a nice Great Lakes strain in the Manistee or some of these other larger, more productive systems. There seems to be some promise there. Yes.
And so, Ellen, you're involved in that other effort, how to figure out ways to contain the mussels themselves. How
Yeah,
far off from a solution are we? Where are we on that?
we're getting close to understanding better what the interaction is between the mussels, the zooplankton, the food for larval whitefish. In terms of solving the problem, that's a much, much bigger problem. Remember, we've got basically all of the bottom of the Great Lakes covered in zebra mussels and quagga mussels right now. There's no solution that's just going to get rid of them. It's too big. We cannot poison or otherwise actively remove mussels. So if we're able to draw a very clear linkage between, okay, too many zebra mussels, not enough zooplankton, not enough food for larvae, and there's a lot of information that says that is in fact the series of linkages, then the question is, can we prompt progress towards having less mussels? And bizarrely, another invasive species comes into play here. And I think Doug's done a very good job of illustrating the fact that we're constantly reacting in terms of management and research to these sequences of exotic species we've let arrive into the Great Lakes. First there's lamprey, and then there's alewife, and then there's zebra mussels, and there's quagga mussels, and then there's round gobies. This is this small fish that anglers will be familiar with, that curiously, that they're very, very highly abundant in the Great Lakes now in shallow water. Their favorite food is, zebra and quagga mussels, because that's what they ate in their native area in Eastern Europe. In areas where there are not zebra mussels, or quagga mussels, when they invade, the gobies are plentiful enough that they can basically crop down the colonies of zebra and quagga mussels. So is it possible, for example, and this is just one of the various thought processes going on, is it possible that if we could locally reduce the number of zebra or quagga mussels, that their recolonization could be inhibited by these colonies of exotic gobies? Gobies are a nuisance in all sorts of other ways, but they can actually be helpful to us in terms of competing with or specifically consuming zebra and quagga mussels and keeping those colonies down so they weren't doing as much damage to the zooplankton populations. So from a scientific standpoint, we're in the process of, again, trying to figure out, could we remove zebra mussels temporarily? And I keep saying zebra and quagga mussels, we call them dreissenid mussels. Could we, in fact, remove them, the current stock of them from an area that's being used, for example, by spawning whitefish? And then when they start to recolonize, is it possible that that would, in fact, be slowed down by the presence of round gobies?
So I know we've got some reader questions we need to get to. I want to pose a question to each of you that we could probably spend an entire hour on, but I'll ask that each of you spend, a couple minutes. What more could governments, industry, other institutions, and the public be doing to address this problem? And I'll start with Amanda.
Well, I know that when I was first going to those conferences, and like I've been a part of Fishtown Preservation for nearly 20 years. And when it came up about whitefish, it was always, oh no, you can't raise them. You can't do that. So the fact that some of the local tribes and are doing that work, I would like the government to really get behind that a whole lot more. I wish we had more space. I would like for us to be able to do it right down in Fishtown if we could, and have the public get to learn more about it. But just to know that there wasn't an effort and things were just dismissed when there are, hundreds of other species of fish that were being raised, I would just like to see a lot invested into that. I've been able to get to know people who are part of like there's an experiment going on in Good Harbor Bay right now, which is within our fishing zone. And there are folks that are going down and they're part of an experiment and they're diving and they're just literally hand removing some of these, the mussels, just so they can start to see what's going to happen in different places. And it just seems like this tiny little team. And there's another spot where they're doing it as well. More efforts like that just to see what's going to be happening. I realize I'm more of the cultural background, but I know that without all of this research and everything that has happened, there really isn't a hope for it. But for people to understand as well what is lost if you don't invest, if you don't keep it in mind. And I know people, some are saying that you should maybe stop fishing for whitefish at all. Let's stop that. But that also stops a lot of things. There are ways, I think, to balance that regulation and study and all at the same time. I don't think it's impossible. It takes the right people in the room. And quite honestly, I appreciate hearing Ellen saying, but there are light spots. To keep going for those light spots of where things can be happening, and for groups that are doing good things, and put resources into that and make this happen so that It's just one of the oldest industries in our state. It's a symbol of the Great Lakes, not just whitefish, but other species as well. To not push is to just let go of something that I think is part of the heartstring of who we are.
And I'll, just to go in the order you appear on my screen, I'll kick it to Doug next and then Ellen.
Yeah, I think, in terms of how do we get through this and how do we solve this problem, and what can people do? I think it is, to me, it's getting hold of your legislators, elevating this up the chain there, state legislators, federal legislators. I think the model that really seems to be most successful is that Great Lakes Fish Commission. And so the Great Lakes Fish Commission, was really put together to address an invasive species that came in and was harming a native species. And so that basic tenet of that commission, I think, holds here still. It's been refined to maybe just be too specific to lamprey, but I think if we get that opened up, and have some funds that go into that, and really, get young researchers, get people maybe that aren't necessarily, in the know there to really think about this issue, then I think we maybe can get some very innovative solutions. Lampricide was really a home run, that allowed the controlling of lamprey, to the degree that we are today. So if we're able to find something similar, a quaggicide, there's been different cancers that have been looked at. If it's just a matter of getting a giant roller and just crushing all of these over large pieces, stretches of water, there's got to be some really innovative ideas out there that can help us move this through, while we continue to buy some time. And I think the hatcheries certainly can play a role in that. And if we can get our state partners and our federal partners, to invest in that as well, then that'll buy us time. But I think it's really, elevating it up, and what people can do is have conversations, right? I think we all care about Great Lakes whitefish, and it again is just not that one species. It's more or less the keystone species right now in terms of that. And so if you care about walleye, if you care about perch, if you care about these other species, they're impacted as well, in that regard. So yeah.
And Ellen.
Yeah, Archie. Well, I think Doug and Amanda have really brought a lot of the essential pieces together very, very well. I think so the keys of this collaboration, communication, teamwork. I mean, it's tremendous that we've got both the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, the scientists with the state and federal agencies, and particularly the tribal scientists and tribal members all working together collaboratively towards this goal and bringing different ways of understanding, different ways of thinking about this problem, addressing it. Clearly in the background, what's always needed is, as Amanda pointed out, is we need the people to do the work and therefore the funding to fund the people to do the work. So that project you mentioned in Good Harbor, the other site is Thunder Bay in Lake Huron, where I've been involved, is funded by folks like Great Lakes Fish Commission, Nature Conservancy is involved, a lot of agencies, including the U.S. Geological Survey. But we need to continue the awareness, that, again, the communication, so people understand how important this is, and address the federal government and say, you can't cut funding for something that's this essential to the ecology of the Great Lakes and the economics as well. You're dead right, Amanda. We do not want to just say, oh, we just got to stop fishing. I mean, I hope it never gets to the point where we have so few fish that we cannot sustain any kind of a fishery. But the fishery itself is such a critical cultural component. We can't stop without losing that culture of how to fish for these fish and how to prepare them, how to eat whitefish, how to cook whitefish. Then that needs to be retained as part of the North American and the tribal culture, so that we understand what we could have lost. It's maintained, it's cherished, and we keep working towards bringing it back in a healthy state again.
And that brings me, to this reader question that a few people have asked either in the chat or ahead of time, which is, would shutting down fishing for whitefish have an impact on allowing these fish to bounce back? Setting aside these cultural questions, would it make an impact on the population? Does anyone want to take a stab?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah, so we get this question brought up to us quite a few times. So commercial fishing, you set net, and so these are operations that you invest quite a bit of time in. So for our fishermen, commercial fishermen, they're gill net fishermen, and then you have trap net fishermen as well. And so when you're setting a net, there's a lot of time invested in doing that. So you want to be successful in your harvest. What we've seen is that whitefish used to be the primary. That's what you would go after and target. And then lake trout would be a bycatch, more or less. What we're finding now is that the only way that our fishermen can make a viable living is that they're going after lake trout and they're getting whitefish as a bycatch. So if they were to just try to target whitefish, there's not as enough of them and they're dispersed far and wide that you would not be able to economically make a viable living by setting your gill net and investing time in your boat and your gas and those types of things because you just simply wouldn't catch enough. So, but with that being said, when they do catch them, they're going to market, and that's part allowing us to continue on to have a fish presence here. In addition to that, we do set regulations. So there's a safe allowable harvest, determining what you can safely harvest. So those numbers are calculated on an annual basis, sometimes a 2-year basis, with that in mind. And so that's why it's important for us, and we still do, the state and tribes go out and do assessments to assess where those populations are at, in addition to monitoring our commercial harvest, in addition to listening to our fishermen, who are really the ones on the ground that tell us where things are at. But the fishery for Great Lakes whitefish, if you removed all commercial fishing, would still be suffering because of the quagga mussels. And so the harvest is more or less de minimis in that regard, and it will not solve the problem that we have right now with whitefish. Removing that harvest won't rehabilitate the fishery. You need to address quagga mussels in order to rehabilitate the fishery.
Yeah, I just want to add on that is also our commercial fisherman, when he goes out, I mean, there are size limits. You don't get to just bring in everything. There's age things about it as well. But for our fishery, and which was just off the coast of, off of Leland, we're only allowed to catch the whitefish, and that has to do with other dynamics that are in play. So 90% of our fish are lake trout, often in our nets, but every single one of those has to get put back into the water. So we're having to put a lot of effort into just getting the whitefish. And I don't know that we will ever get to go get lake trout. There's other questions there that I have about that. So if it weren't for my organization being involved, our fishermen could not do what he is doing, because we are so aware of how important it is that people even understand, and it is an authentic fishery, even if we only have 10,000 pounds. No businessman in their right, as a fisherman or businessman, could do this if it weren't for what we're trying to keep going and hope for some other ways that we would be able to catch other species at some time that could be economically viable. But yes, but it is very monitored and studied, and yes, the fishermen know so much. And I don't know that knowledge has always been valued. And many times they kept things to themselves because they felt that knowledge was going to be used against them in other ways. So there's a whole folklore of that if people are interested in learning about, is that distrust that has been there, that hopefully is a part of the mending and going forward, that can be better worked with as well. It's not just the federal governments, but it's those relationships with those fishers who are doing the work, that you don't want to take information and then just stop what they were helping with. And that's across the board for, I think, the state and the tribal fishermen.
Yeah, one thing I was told by some of the, biologists who are looking into this is that part of the reason we know so much about how far whitefish have declined is because there is a catch to track, and that, there are other species out there that are likely suffering. We just don't have data. So it is interesting to hear that point. There's a question in here that I think Ellen can probably speak to. This reader asks, on the question of the water column and phytoplankton, could you envision sort of restoration of the water column at a more local level as part of this effort to buy time? For example, could crushing the mussels in a smaller region, be helpful? Or is this really just a Great Lakes wide problem and you need to get rid of them lake wide to have an impact on the food source?
Sadly, I think it's the latter. It really is lakes wide. Certainly, we can work at a local level and experimentally try crushing, smothering, otherwise getting rid of a local population. But imagine taking, say, the state of New York and saying, okay, well, we're just going to get rid of all the foliage. I mean, we couldn't. The land mass, or in this case, the lake mass, the bottom of the lake, is too huge and too widely colonized. And of course, lakes mix. I mean, the absence of zooplankton in one area can new zooplankton can be washed in from an adjacent area, or the reverse. If you've got an area, you've cleaned mussels, and so now there's more zooplankton that's not getting filtered out. That zooplankton's got to get moved and diluted by the rest of the lake. So it's a local find out what's going on solution, but it's got to be done lakes wide for it to be effective. And that's deeply problematic for what we're trying to do.
And is there anything that eats, we've seen things about like marketing invasive carp as a cat food or, as a human food. Is there anything that eats these mussels that we could use as an ally? You talked about gobies, but they're obviously not devouring them at a lake-wide scale. Or could humans, harvest and eat these things? Is there any hope in that realm?
There was some talk at one point. I mean, they zebra mussels in the early days were getting removed by the tonnage from water intake plants and other human structures that they were fouling and causing problems with. And it's like, what do we do with all of these dead mussels? And the suggestion was made, this is good calcium. Chickens love calcium. Let's grind it up and make it as chicken food. Not a bad solution at all. One of the issues is that zebra mussels tend to accumulate contaminants. They live at the base of the food web. They live on the bottom. If there's anything in the way of lead or other heavy metals or even things like PCBs, they will incorporate it into their shells. And so you can't use as a fertilizer or as a foodstuff something that's concentrating contaminants. So that one is definitely problematic. Gobies will do a remarkably good job at cropping off the little mussels. They can't eat the really big ones. Their mouths aren't big enough. But again, if you've sort of done a one-step removal of large mussels, and now the colony's starting to grow back up again from small ones, it looks like there is some potential that the gobies can slow that down. And certainly working on the reefs that we built some experimental reefs in Lake Huron, the colonization of mussels seems to have been really slowed down once we built those new reefs, because they were new substrate. As the zebra mussels started to colonize, there were already gobies in place and they were eating all the little ones before they grew big. So these sort of natural solutions might be easier than trying to, in a sense, crop or tractor or graze out the entire bottom of the Great Lakes artificially by human equipment.
And we have a reader, Christina, who asks, what's the probability of losing all of the whitefish in the lakes? And I guess knowing what we know about Lake Superior being a little bit of a different beast, I guess I would rephrase that to the probability of losing them all in Lakes Michigan and Huron. And how much time do we have left?
I'll jump in, if I may, here and respond also to Amanda, who is very well spoken here, about this critical difference between economic extinction and biological extinction or ecological extinction. The impact on the fishes is going to be greater earlier than it will be on the actual species. The species can drop beyond the point at which it's not even worth putting nets out, unless, as you say, Doug, you're fishing for something else and you catch the occasional whitefish. So the ability to make any kind of a living off whitefish alone would disappear preceding actual extinction of the species. So you can have lake whitefish swimming around there in very, very small numbers. And if all went well, they can recover from disasters and resume a fishery. But we've just got to get rid of the pressure, which lake trout and lamprey. Once we got rid of the pressure of lamprey predation, lake trout have come back. We've got to find the same kinds of solution for lake whitefish.
Yeah, I would just add on that, we don't know, right? So if we had a crystal ball, we could say, yeah, we got 5 years and then everything is going to be extirpated from Lake Michigan. Then we'd have something to operate on. But we do know that things do become extirpated, and that there are places that, of course, things are become extinct. So we know that this is one stressor that's really causing quite a bit of harm to whitefish, but that's not the only stressor. So there is also climate change that we see are impacting these. Ellen mentioned that the clarity of the water allows UV to penetrate. Well, lack of ice allows UV to penetrate as well. And so these species, whitefish specifically, is a near shore spawner. They're a fall spawner, so they lay eggs in the fall and they hatch in the spring. And so that's a long time to be in the water. And so if you don't get proper ice coverage, you're just getting this UV penetration for much longer periods. And we're seeing that that's having an impact. Lack of ice also means that there's a lot more battering, wave action near shore. And that also, we believe, has an impact on whitefish. And we're seeing more severe storms. So now you're getting no ice, and then you're getting these larger storm events that are battering them additionally. So I think it's this combination of these things that could, without our intervention, could be the perfect storm where we do end up with an extirpation from Lake Michigan or Lake Huron. Will there still be Great Lakes whitefish in Lake Superior? It seems to be holding right now, but that doesn't mean that there's something else that we don't anticipate, could infect them or impact them. But I think we're really at the top right now. We're 90% decline. It's going further. We haven't seen it stop, hasn't stabilized for Great Lakes whitefish. That's, very, very concerning. And I'm concerned certainly about our responsibility as managers, as tribal people, that if we allow this to happen under our watch, shame on us. History will look poorly upon us for not doing all that we could to help them. And we have a time period right now where I think that we can, certainly.
And we have several more very good questions in the chat. Unfortunately, I want to be respectful of people's times, and we're 3 minutes to 1. So I will call it there. But I do want to thank all of the readers and watchers who posed questions and who joined us and listened. Thank you, Amanda, Doug, and Ellen, for sharing your insights and expertise. And with that, I will kick it back to Kathy to close us out.
Thanks, Kelly, and again to Amanda, Doug, and Ellen for this really important conversation. And I will say Kelly's continuing to report on what's happening with whitefish in the Great Lakes through the rest of the summer. So please come back to Bridge, Michigan for her reporting. I want to remind everybody that we'll be posting a recording of the program on Bridge, Michigan's website, bridgemi.com, as well as through our app and our social media channels later today. So if you've joined us late, or you know others who care about the issues impacting our state, and in particular this one, you can access that conversation in those places. Remember to subscribe to our newsletters and follow us on our social media channels as well. Well, that's it for today. Thanks again for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your week.